The Medicine Bag by Virginia Driving Hawk Sneve. My kid sister Cheryl and I always bragged about our Sioux grandpa, Joe Iron Shell. Our friends, who had always lived in the city and only knew about Indians from movies and TV, were impressed by our stories. Maybe we exaggerated and made Grandpa and the reservation sound glamorous, but when we'd return home to Iowa after our yearly summer visit to Grandpa, we always had some exciting tale to tell. We always had some authentic Sioux article to show our listeners. One year, Cheryl had new moccasins that Grandpa had made. On another visit, he gave me a small, round, flat, rawhide drum which was decorated with a painting of a warrior riding a horse. He taught me a real Sioux chant to sing while I beat the drum with a leather-covered stick that had a feather on the end. Man, that really made an impression. We never showed our friends Grandpa's picture. Not that we were ashamed of him, but because we knew that the glamorous tales we told didn't go with the real thing. Our friends would have laughed at the picture because Grandpa wasn't tall and stately like TV Indians. His hair wasn't in braids but hung in stringy grey strands on his neck, and he was old. He was our great-grandfather, and he didn't live in a tipi but all by himself in a part log, part tar paper shack on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. So when Grandpa came to visit us, I was so ashamed and embarrassed I could have died. There are a lot of ippy poodles and other fancy little dogs in our neighborhood, but they usually barked singly at the mailman from the safety of their own yards. Now it sounded as if a whole pack of mutts were barking together in one place. I got up and walked to the curb to see what the commotion was. About a block away, I saw a crowd of little kids yelling with the dogs yipping and growling around someone who was walking down the middle of the street. I watched the group as it slowly came closer and saw that in the center of the strange procession was a man wearing a tall black hat. He would pause now and then to peer at something in his hand and then at the houses on either side of the street. I felt cold and hot at the same time as I recognized the man. "Oh no," I whispered, "it's Grandpa." I stood on the curb, unable to move even though I wanted to run and hide. Then I got mad, and when I saw how the yippy dogs were growling and nipping at the old man's baggy pant legs and how warily he poked them away with his cane, "Stupid mutts," I said as I ran to rescue Grandpa. When I kicked and hollered at the dogs to get away, they put their tails between their legs and scattered. The kids ran to the curb where they watched me and the old man. "Grandpa," I said, and felt pretty dumb when my voice cracked. I reached for his beat-up old tin suitcase which was tied shut with a rope, but he set it down right in the street and shook my hand. "How, Takosa, grandchild?" He greeted me formally in Sioux. All I could do was stand there with the whole neighborhood watching and shake the hand of the leather-brown old man. I saw how his grey hair straggled from under his big black hat, which had a drooping feather in its crown. His rumpled black suit hung like a sack over his stooped frame. As he shook my hand, his coat fell open to expose a bright red satin shirt with a beaded bolo tie under the collar. His get-up wasn't out of place on the reservation, but it sure was here, and I wanted to sink right through the pavement. "Ahai," I muttered with my head down. I tried to pull my hand away when I felt his bony hand trembling and looked up to see fatigue in his face. I felt like crying. I couldn't think of anything to say, so I picked up Grandpa's suitcase, took his arm, and guided him up the driveway to our house. Mom was standing on the steps. I don't know how long she had been watching, but her hand was over her mouth and she looked as if she couldn't believe what she saw. Then she ran to us. "Grandpa," she gasped, "how in the world did you get here?" She checked her move to embrace Grandpa, and I remembered that such a display of affection is unseemly to the Sioux and would embarrass him. "How, Mary?" he said as he shook Mom's hand. She smiled and took his other arm. As we supported him up the steps, the door banged open and Cheryl came bursting out of the house. She was all smiles and was so obviously glad to see Grandpa that I was ashamed of how I felt. "Grandpa," she yelled happily, "you came to see us." Grandpa smiled and Mom and I let go of him as he stretched out his arms to my 10-year-old sister, who was still young enough to be hugged. "Wikinkala, little girl," he greeted her and then collapsed. He had fainted. Mom and I carried him into our sewing room where we had a spare bed. After we had Grandpa on the bed, Mom stood there helplessly patting his shoulder. "Shouldn't we call the doctor, Mom?" I suggested, since she didn't seem to know what to do. "Yes," she agreed with a sigh. "You make Grandpa comfortable, Martin." I reluctantly moved to the bed. I knew Grandpa wouldn't want to have Mum undress him, but I didn't want to either. He was so skinny and frail that his coat slipped off easily. When I loosened his tie and opened his shirt collar, I felt a small leather pouch that hung from a thong around his neck. I left it alone and moved to remove his boots. The scuffed old cowboy boots were tight, and he moaned as I put pressure on his legs to jerk them off. I put the boots on the floor and saw why they fit so tight. Each one was stuffed with money. I looked at the bills that lined the boots and started to ask about them. But Grandpa's eyes were closed again. Mom came back with a basin of water. "The doctor thinks Grandpa is suffering from heat exhaustion," she explained as she bathed Grandpa's face. Mom gave a big sigh. "Oh, Martin, how do you suppose he got here?" We found out after the doctor's visit. Grandpa was angrily sitting up in bed while Mom tried to feed him some soup. "Tonight you let Mary feed you, Grandpa," spoke my dad, who had gotten home from work just as the doctor was leaving. "You are not really sick," he said as he gently pushed Grandpa back against the pillows. "The doctor said you just got too tired and hot after your long trip." Grandpa relaxed, and between sips of soup, he told us of his journey. Soon after our visit to him, Grandpa decided that he would like to see where his only living descendants lived and what our home was like. Besides, he admitted sheepishly, he was lonesome after we left.